They laughed at my old phone before lunch, when the cafeteria light slanted in just so and turned the cracks across my screen into a spiderweb of gold. Saba and her orbit of girls had been doing the thing where they act like a joke walked into the room and sat next to me. Saba pinched the sides of her brand new slab and made a face at my table, loud enough for the row behind us to hear. Do they even sell chargers for fossils? Maybe she winds it like a watch. They sell them next to the VHS tapes, her friend said, and the table exploded. My phone blinked. The battery was missing a backplate, and the rubber band that held it in place was the color of overboiled spinach. It buzzed with a message from my grandmother asking if I'd eaten, the polite unit of love we passed between our phones a dozen times a day. I slipped it into my hoodie pocket. The cafeteria smelled like steam and cinnamon, and outside the windows, a stray cat walked the wall as if it were a catwalk. I could have told them a lot of things. I could have explained that the phone belonged to my mom first, that the chipped corner happened the week she took her last ferry crossing and leaned too far over the side, laughing at a gull that dared to ride the wind backward. I could have said the keypad still had soft spots from my mother's thumbs, that the torch at the top was bright enough to find a light switch in a blackout. I could have said the phone held voice messages that, when I couldn't fall asleep, I played like lullabies of ordinary life. Zara, pick up eggs. Zara, I'm outside. Zara, I love you. Instead, I speared my rice and let the joke run itself out. People who laughed at my phone were mostly laughing at the idea that a person like me deserved anything newer. That's what I told myself. It's easier to be angry than embarrassed. On the bus ride home, I pressed the old phone to my cheek so the tiny warmth of the battery would push away the air-conditioned cold. A man in front of me watched a drama on his massive screen without headphones. A woman beside me wrote notes on a glass surface with a stylus and a concentration that made me jealous. I sank into my seat and listened to a voice clip from Mom that I'd rationed, holding it back like candy. The mangoes are terrible this year, she whispered as if it were a secret. Don't buy any unless you smell them. Promise. I promised. When the bus pulled into our neighborhood, buildings elbowing each other for space, balconies hung with laundry like flags, I tucked the phone away. Gran waved from the second-floor window, the same way she always had since I was a kid who needed to be guided home. She'd moved slower this past year. I tried not to watch it. Our place had a kitchen that liked to hold its breath until the on switch on the rice cooker clicked. We had a living room where every piece of furniture knew the exact outline of our lives. Gran sat on the edge of the couch with her knees together. Next to her was a folded tissue in case I'd cry, and next to that a plate of guava slices in case I didn't. You look taller, she said. I'm wearing platform sneakers, I said. Those make you fall, she decided. And then, like always, did you eat? I nodded. She still looked unconvinced, but the guava plate got pushed closer to me. I took one. We watched the ceiling fan turn the air. The old phone buzzed like a fly trapped in a jar. More exams? She asked. More Mean Girls, I said, and relayed the cafeteria chorus. Gran shook her head slowly, as if what I'd said were static on an old radio, as if underlying it was another program that only she could hear. She touched the old phone on the table like a person touches a sleeping baby, lightly, reverently, with a respect for what it holds. They laughed at their own reflection, she said. Not at this. I know, I said, but didn't. And when you are ready, Gran added, you'll put it away somewhere it can sleep properly. That's all. It's not a battlefield. She meant my mother. She meant grief. She meant my own stubbornness that felt like both a shield and a shovel I kept using to dig deeper. I nodded, but the idea of putting the phone away made my throat burn. I bit the guava. At the repair kiosk where I worked after school, 3 subway stops away, tucked like a secret under the escalator of a mall, I told my boss, Baba, about the cafeteria performance. Kids, he said. We're soldering a charging port with the delicacy of a surgeon. Cruelty is free, so they spend it. Can I get a small advance? I asked, as casually as I could. Just a little. I'll double up on weekend shifts, and I can... You want a new phone? He didn't make it a question. He flipped his magnifying glass up and squinted at me. Not just any. You've been drooling at the poster like a cat at fish. He was talking about the limited edition phone the mall had plastered everywhere, the Lumen 1 Aurora. Even the name was embarrassingly dramatic. The poster showed a sliver of color that looked like dawn or an oil slick, depending on the angle. It was the first phone from a small company that promised a human-first operating system and a camera that made low light look like daylight. Mostly, it had a physical switch on the side that everyone online talked about like it was a sacred relic. Block mode. Flip it up, and anyone not on your circle could be silenced. Calls, texts, DMs, notifications dusted into silence. I wasn't drooling, I said, which was a lie. You want it because it's limited, he pressed. Or because you're tired of apologizing for the sound your phone makes when it rings? Both were true. My phone's ringtone sounded like a train station in 1998, and the limited edition meant nobody at school had it yet, which meant they'd have to find a new thing to mock. It meant for a minute I could breathe. Advance? I tried again and held my breath, which felt like standing on a balcony waiting for somebody to look up. Baba sighed and opened the ledger with a click of his tongue. You're a good worker, Zara. Bring your school ID tomorrow. I'll front the rest if you promise to teach me how to use the block mode in case my cousins discover my number again. That night, I lay with my old phone on my chest, listening to the messages I'd saved, the way other people listen to ocean recordings. I held the decision in my hands like a hot cup and didn't drink. I didn't tell Gran about the new phone plan. She was suspicious of anything that began with limited, as if scarcity were a trick. The next afternoon, when the mall's glass doors opened and I could smell the perfume clouds of the department store, I went weak-kneed at the sight of the line outside the Lumen 1 pop-up. A loop of teenagers, men in shirts with collars, a woman in a sari with a girl my age gripping her hand like maybe this was a mother-daughter ritual. I joined the line, sweaty palms and all. When it was my turn, the salesperson, a boy with hair so neat it looked painted on, placed the box on the counter like it was something alive. The packaging was embarrassingly beautiful, all matte indigo with a tiny silver aurora line. He told me about the camera and the biosafe materials and the switch that could silence the world. He told me the first batch had a serial engraving. He told me to take a picture of the serial. I did. My heart beat against my ribs like it was trying to be counted. When I held the Lumen 1 Aurora for the first time, it was lighter than I expected. The edges were softened as if rounded by time. I powered it up. The screen bloomed, color pooling into the corners like ink dropped into water. My old phone twinged in my pocket, like a dog shifting in its sleep. Baba closed the kiosk early after that. Big day, he said, pretending not to be eager to play with a new toy. We set the two phones side by side on the counter, the old with its scuffed face and loyalty, the new with its promises. The air between them felt like a mirror that showed two versions of me. I transferred contacts one by one instead of using the cloud like a normal person. Gran, of course. Baba, my teacher Ms. Ahmed, a few cousins. Amma, who'd moved last year but still sent me recordings of her piano practice that sounded like water trembling. As for everyone from school, I hesitated with a thumb over their names like a priest hovering a blessing or a banishment. I thought that thing could transfer fast, Baba said, drumming his fingers impatiently. It can, I said. I can't. You're holding the switch but refusing to flip it. He wasn't wrong. I logged into the Lumen 1 with a username that was just my name, no numbers, no suffixes, the smallest claim of self. The limited edition setup asked me to choose the 5 people to put in my circle, the ones whose messages would never be blocked no matter what. It warned me, choose carefully. Changing often will reduce the feature's usefulness. The way it capitalized circle made me laugh, and then, when I realized the names I put here would determine what could reach me and what couldn't, made me feel like I was carving something into stone. I picked Gran, Baba, Ms. Ahmed, Amma, and after a long pause, myself. I put my own number there, so that reminders I set to call the dentist or record a thought for a story wouldn't get swept into quiet. It felt dumb. It felt necessary. When I got home, Gran looked up from the news and stared at the phone like a stranger who'd shown up at our door with halwa and a suitcase. It's lovely, she said, which in Gran speak meant, I can see this matters to you, and I am bracing myself for the parts I won't like. I kept the old, I said, lifting my palm. My old phone lay within reach on the table as if I'd donated it a seat. Gran nodded. For a moment, my mother's face flickered in my brain, then steadied. I slept badly that night. The new phone was so quiet the room felt like heavy water. Every time I woke, I touched the side switch to make sure it was still in block mode, and every time it was, A part of me sighed with relief I hated myself for wanting. At school the next day, I made no ceremony of it. I pulled out the Lumen one and set it face down on the cafeteria table like I'd done with my old one, and it was a full 5 minutes before Saba's radar pinged. She squinted. She whispered to her friends. There was a little flurry of them the way birds sometimes fluff before they fly. What's this? Saba asked as if I'd brought a contraband item into class and she was a teacher asking me to explain myself. A phone, I said. No, she said, levering a smile into me. A limited edition phone. She let the last 2 words stretch like gum between us. You robbed a bank? Repair kiosk paycheck, I said. I stacked weekends. You work? Her disbelief was a lens that made her eyes huge and cruel. Yup, I said, and turned the Lumen one on its face again. She made a mental note of the logo, the camera placements, how the light picked up the Aurora line. She would memorize. She would report. It was in her nature to be a tower that things passed through. You going to block us? One of her satellites asked with the glee of someone begging to be told yes. I haven't decided, I said coolly, because I had. I just wanted to see how it felt to lie. That afternoon, after I finished my shift and washed my hands and drank one of the kiosk's sodas that Baba kept for emergencies like heartbreak and exam scores, I sat on the curb outside the mall and did what I'd rehearsed all day. I scrolled through the contact list and I pressed block. I did it with a series of tiny exhales, like someone blowing out a cake with too many candles. I blocked people who had laughed. I blocked people who had watched. I blocked a boy who had offered me his old phone with the benevolence of a colonizer. I blocked the group chat for our class that had once, long ago, been full of notes and reminders, and now was just a waterfall of memes and schedule changes that moved like ghosts through the hallways. I blocked numbers I didn't remember adding. I blocked accounts with names I couldn't connect to faces, but I remembered their words. When I got to Saba, my thumb paused. We were kids together once, the kind of neighbors whose mothers chatted on balconies while we chased the cat and blew bubbles that popped rainbow on our arms. She'd had braids. I'd had a bowl cut. Life happened. Hormones plus a seismic shift in the currency of the schoolyard. I pressed block. The Lumen one made no sound at all when I did it. There was simply a quiet shift in the room of my life. The phone in my palm felt like a black stone warmed by the sun. I set it down. The air around me was traffic and frying dough from the vendor around the corner, and a song someone played in a car that made me think of Amma. On the ride home, my phone didn't buzz once. I watched the city roll by with my hands free, as if I had accidentally traveled back to a time before pings. In the silence, I could hear the wheels of the bus like a sewing machine, stitching us all through the street. That night, Gran asked, "So?" With that one word that soaked up a bowl of questions. I blocked them all, I said. Did you block me? You're in my circle, I said. And when I heard the capital letter in my voice, I laughed. Good, she said, and then added, almost to herself, boundaries are just fences you can move if you want. She pressed her fingers to the old phone on the table like it was a talisman. Did you move this fence? I put it in the drawer, I said. Not forever, just so it can sleep. She nodded, satisfied that nothing had been thrown away in anger, only set aside with care. The first day of my new silence was bliss. It was like when the city's power goes out and for a few minutes before the generators kick, you hear your neighbors breathing. I studied without my attention being trapped and tossed by other people's emergencies. I washed my hair. I made a list of essays to read that Ms. Ahmed had recommended and actually read one. I drew a little box around the day in my planner and colored it in, as if I were painting a tiny room where I could be alone. Day 2 was quieter but twitchier. I caught myself reaching for the phone to check if anyone had noticed I'd disappeared, which is a recognizable flavor of vanity that tastes like iron. On day 3, the consequences arrived. I learned in geography that the field trip was moved up a week and the bus would leave from the south gate. I had to sprint from the locker room to catch it, because the change was posted in the blocked class chat. In the afternoon, Ms. Ahmed texted me to ask if I could help coordinate the literature festival in 2 weeks. The notice, it seemed, had gone out on the chat. She sent the details, sheepish. I know you blocked that thing. I wrote your name on the paper list because you're the only person I trust to be on time. I said yes before the compliment could evaporate. But then, later, I bumped into a wall with a life-size poster of a girl in metallic eyeliner, who looked like she had never waited for a message that didn't come, and it hit me. Blocking them all meant I wasn't just cutting off their noise. I was making my own job harder. Things they would announce in a din, I'd need to collect carefully. I could try to pretend I lived in 2009. The world would not pretend it with me. At the kiosk that evening, I told Baba, and he rolled his chair back until it hit the wall with a thud that made the customers glance over.
"You thought the switch would be pure joy," he said.
It's work also. Like every boundary, he wasn't wrong. But the idea that something could be both a relief and a burden felt unfair. I muttered. I replaced the battery in a taxi driver's phone. I watched a toddler press her hands to the glass of a pet store that was closed, her fingers in a little starfish of longing. That night, I made a plan. I would keep block mode on. I would delete the class chat. But I would create a system for staying informed that didn't require bending my own rules. I went analog. I put a bulletin board above my desk for dates. I asked Ms. Ahmed to send me paper copies of announcements, and I pinned them with rainbow thumbtacks. I signed up for the school's email list, which was so old their server coughed like a smoker before sending anything. I told the few people who mattered, if you need me for something real, call me. Circles and fences. Fences and circles. A week passed. The limited edition phone stopped feeling like armor and started feeling like a thing that belonged to me. The Aurora line caught sunlight in the mornings. The camera made the late afternoon look like a secret. I took photos of Gran's hands kneading dough and of the cat's whiskers when it yawned on our wall. I started a little project without telling anyone, portraits of people holding their oldest object. The electrician in our building cradled his first screwdriver like he was proposing with it. The woman at the vegetable stall hugged her grandmother's brass measuring cup. Baba held a manual from the 1990s with the tenderness of a miracle. Maybe I'll call it Old as Gold, I said to the photo on my screen, then grimaced. No, that's the title of a TV serial. You should call it What We Refuse to Replace, Ms. Ahmed suggested when I showed her a few prints. And maybe put one on the wall at the festival. I blocked the festival's group chat, I confessed. Is that bad leadership? It is committed leadership, she said, eyes warm. Use the notice board. Use your feet. The older technologies have not failed us. Of course, our school did not run on older technologies. It ran on the convenience of whoever shouted loudest online. The literature festival planning meetings were a test. Half the committee didn't show because they assumed decisions would be in the chat. I started doing something I hadn't done since primary school. I made flyers. I printed schedules. I taped them to walls at eye level and stood there for 15 minutes to answer questions, and in those 15 minutes, 5 people stopped to fold the information into their heads. Analog, Rafi said the third time he saw me taping a flyer to the door of the auditorium. He was in my math class, all shoulders and a shy grin that looked like he'd borrowed it and wasn't sure he was allowed to keep it. It's bold. Bold is one word, I said, tearing a crooked strip of tape. He took it from me and smoothed it with the patience of a person ironing a shirt for a job interview. You're serious about the blocking, he said without looking at me. It's the limited edition feature, I said lightly, because I didn't want to talk about the way the silence made room in my skull, like a shelf I could put my thoughts on without them falling. He nodded like he understood anyway. Saba avoided me, which was a relief. The silence between us wasn't peace exactly, but it wasn't war either. It was like the space on the mat each of us claimed in yoga. We could ruin each other's balance by flailing, or we could accept the boundaries and breathe. Then, a week before the festival, it happened. Baba called me to the back of the kiosk and set my old phone on the counter with his lips pressed into a straight line. You left it in the drawer, he said. But it did not sleep. On the screen was a text from an unknown number with a link. And even without clicking, I knew it was bad. The preview showed the first line of a voice message. My mother's voice, laughing about the mangoes. It had been posted on a new account, the kind of account created by people who know shame will follow it like a shadow. The caption was something like, she's so retro, her mom left her voicemail from heaven, with emojis elbowing meaning aside. There were comments. There are always comments. My breath went ragged the way paper tears in a humid room. I touched the side of the Lumen one and felt the block mode switch under my thumb, but it wasn't for this. This wasn't noise. It was a theft. I loved that voice message as if it were a last photograph of a person you couldn't stand because they looked so alive. The thought of strangers tapping play made the inside of my skin itch. Who? I managed. We'll find out, Baba said. We'll report. We'll take it down. By then, I started and then couldn't finish. By then, the water would have already moved downriver. I went home and told Gran because I couldn't not. She listened without flinching. She sat very still, as if someone had just cut her hair and she was waiting for the weight of it to catch up. Bring the old phone, she said. I did. She lifted the back carefully and looked at the battery contacts. This is clean, she said softly, which was not what I expected to hear her say. What do you mean? I mean it wasn't this one, she said. The recording that leaked. It must have been downloaded before. When your mother... She stopped, and we let the ghost of the sentence sit between us until it dissipated. Show me the comments. Usually I would have refused. This was the woman who reads the news with one eyebrow permanently raised in armor. But I turned the lumen one over. We scrolled the poison together. There were the familiar screen names. There were the cruel innovations. Someone had auto-tuned my mother's voice. Someone else had paired it with a video of rotten mangoes. The comments moved like a swarm. I felt my own fingers curl into fists. We alert the school, Gran said. Call Ms. Ahmed, dear. I blocked the school chat, I said, and wanted to sink through the floor. Then use the older technology, Gran said, rubbing my knuckles until my hands opened. Our mouths. We went to school early the next morning and found Ms. Ahmed in the staff room, her scarf half-tied and her eyes already the color of coffee. She listened, jaw tight. I will take this to the head, she said. This crosses a line even teenagers understand. The head was a man who had lines on his forehead like rulers. He moved faster than I expected. He was angry and not the kind that only pretends. The school sent out a general announcement about cyberbullying, which felt like throwing a bucket of water at a wildfire, but then they did something useful. They asked the tech club to trace the origin of the post. I had blocked the club group chat, but Rafi caught up to me in the corridor and said, We're on it, with a grimness that made me want to cry and also hug him, and also not make eye contact. It took them 2 days. In those 2 days, I didn't sleep much. I used block mode like a raft and held on. I did my homework. I ate the middle of my bread and left the crust. I couldn't bear the idea of throwing my mother's voice into the deep. I pressed the old phone to my ear and listened to her say, The mangoes are terrible this year. And somehow that sentence, so ordinary, felt like a gate that would refuse to be forced. On day 3, Rafi slipped me a note like we were in a spy movie. It came from the phone shop near the bus depot, it said. Employee who had access to customer devices. And then a name. A name I knew too well. Tariq. He worked 3 kiosks down from Baba. He was Saba's cousin. I took the note to Baba. He swore in a way that was perfectly shaped. He marched us to the bus depot like we were a small army. The shop was open and tart with the smell of solar. Tariq looked up, and the look on his face, half brazen, half boy, made my stomach turn. Without ceremony, Baba swung the glass door shut and flipped the sign to closed. He took my Lumen 1 out of his pocket and tapped the recordings. He took the old phone from my bag. He held them up like scales. Explain, he said. And Tariq did the thing people do when they are about to be punished. He made himself a story that would be softer than the truth. It was a joke, he started. Stealing is not a joke, Baba said calmly, with the air of a man who had given very few lectures in his life and wanted to make sure this one counted. It is the opposite of a joke. Tariq's mouth opened and closed. His boss materialized from the back, eyes wide with the knowledge that this would be bad for business. I recorded the conversation with a steady hand. They apologized. They panicked. They deleted what they could delete. We called the head. We involved parents. We involved the police because, as Baba said through his teeth, when nothing small stops a disease, you use the bigger medicine. Saba found me at the back stairs later that day. She didn't cry because she wasn't the crying type, but her inhale hitched. I didn't know, she said. The words sounded like a plea, but there was something in her eyes that said, I didn't want to know. I blocked you, I said, because when you don't know what else to offer, you offer the truth. I deserve it. She kicked the metal stair with the toe of her white shoe. This wasn't... the mango thing is... She shook her head, and I watched a map of a girl I'd known for 13 years rearrange. She was more than her orbit and less than her bravado. She looked small all of a sudden, like a child with her hand caught in the jar. "Boundaries aren't revenge," I said, surprising both of us. "They're just boundaries," she nodded. "Can you unblock me if I try?" "I don't know," I said honestly, because forgiveness is a door that swings on complicated hinges, and I didn't want to promise anything my heart couldn't open. She nodded again and went down the stairs like a person stepping into a rain she knew would be cold and cleansing. The Literature Festival week came wheeling in. Somebody unplugged a row of lights in the auditorium, and now the stage looked like a cave. The sound system made a noise like a goat clearing its throat. Half the writing submissions were on somebody's laptop that wouldn't turn on. The group chat panicked. I didn't see it, but I saw the aftermath in people's hot faces. I made a chart with boxes. I assigned tasks. I channeled anger at the world and love for my mother's voice into getting the microphones to behave. I refused to be breakable. The morning of the festival, just when the banners were up and the author we'd convinced to come for free was in a taxi, the power went out. The city grid hiccuped and everything blinked. The lights died. The sound system gagged. The AC quit. The chat erupted, I was told, in a chorus of despair. I felt a wave of quiet push against my chest like surf. "Generators?" the head said, suddenly beside me like a person who has learned to walk softly. They were supposed to kick in. They didn't. "We can use the older technologies," I said, "because repetition is how rituals become real. We ran cables to the few UPS units still holding a charge. We borrowed a hand crank radio from the science lab. How had they gotten that? And used it to coordinate between the auditorium and the courtyard like it was a war. We moved the poetry readings outside where the trees could be our ceiling, and the paper fans we gave out could be both props and relief. We used a megaphone someone found in the sports office from 10 years ago, loud and tinny and glorious. We printed the schedule with a cheap inkjet and taped it to the pillars. We used the Lumen 1's block mode to keep the rumor flood out and the camera to record the performances in low light that turned our students into saints. Rafi, breathing hard, ran like a relay stick between teams. He had a scar I hadn't noticed before on his left eyebrow, a pale comma, as if his face was always asking the world a question. By afternoon, the grid came back grudgingly, but we kept the festival outdoors because the poems needed open air. The author said afterward that it was the best reading she'd done in years, that the quiet between poems was the kind that actually penetrates. People posted photos anyway, the ones who hadn't thrown their phones down in despair, and the city internet, so quick to be cruel, was quick to be kind. "Resourceful," the comments said. "Magic," they said. "Whoever made this happen deserves a holiday," they said, and I let the applause run over me like rain I didn't have to collect. When I got home that night, I was so tired that my legs kept moving even when I told them to stop. Gran had set out a bowl of cold noodles and 2 guavas as if we were repeating a charm. We sat on the sofa and ate and watched a show about a woman who runs a hotel for ghosts. The old phone lay in the drawer like an animal curled in a burrow. The Lumen 1 hummed against my knee with the vestiges of messages from those who were in my circle, and those I allowed temporarily because they had proved themselves. The post with my mother's voice had been taken down, and an apology that read as sincere as possible in that space had replaced it. The school's head had called to say the police had spoken to Tariq, and he had admitted everything, and he would pay a fine and do community service. And the way the head said community service made it sound like ancient punishment and modern mercy had intersected. "You did good," Gran said in the sideways way she avoids too much direct praise. "You made a room where sound couldn't get in unless you opened the window." "I almost shut you out," I confessed. "Because the truth likes to be aired. You put me in your circle." She said it without capitalization, but I felt the capital anyway. We sat. The ceiling fan spun. Outside, the city didn't sleep so much as exhale. I thought about the words people messaged me that day. Gratitude mostly. Little arrows of kindness I was not good at receiving. I thought about Saba, her plastered smile flickering. I thought about Baba, about Rafi's comma of a scar. I thought about the way people think an object will fix a life. The new phone, the limited edition thing, the special switch. I thought about how it hadn't fixed anything, how it had forced me to learn how to hold the line I drew, and how to redraw it when it made something worse. I thought about my mother's voice and how the ordinary will always be the most sacred because you don't notice it's the door you live inside until someone tries to pull it off its hinges. I took the old phone out of the drawer then, certain of something I'd been avoiding. I wrapped it in a soft scarf the color of the Aurora line and put it inside the box the Lumen one had come in, the indigo rectangle with its indents like a place your hands remember. I slid the box onto the shelf where Gran kept her wedding bangles and a photograph of a beach we'd never visited. Not a battlefield, I said softly, as if to the phone, as if to my mother. A bedroom, sleep. Gran smiled at me, the sly smile of a person whose student has understood a lesson without being told. She got up slowly. The couch sighed. She went to bed. Some nights, when the limited edition glow of my phone hummed in a way that made me restless, I flipped the block mode switch up and lay back, feeling the quiet settle like a shawl. I had started to write again, which was a way of telling myself that I existed beyond the stories people told about me. My first piece was titled, "They Laughed at My Old Phone, Then I Blocked Them All," and Ms. Ahmed said it was too sharp, that I should call it something like, "On Why Silence Sometimes Saves Us," and I rolled my eyes and then changed it, because she was right in the way that made me resist before I obeyed. A month later, the limited edition phones were no longer limited. The second batch had shipped, and suddenly the Aurora line was everywhere, on the bus, in the hands of a cafe singer, peeking from the pocket of our neighborhood cop. Status only stays status until it's on sale. People stopped noticing my phone and went back to staring at their own reflections. The city rotated its concerns. One afternoon, I was walking back from the market with a bag of tomatoes whose skins looked like satin. Saba was at the gate of her building, hair undone, no audience. She looked tired. The summer heat had softened her edges the way it did chocolate left out. She saw me and didn't pretend she hadn't. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. "Festival was good," she offered, as if we were two colleagues discussing a project instead of two girls who had dragged childhood behind them like a boat. "Thanks," I said. "I told Tariq he's disgusting," she blurted, and then winced to have said anyone's name. "He said he's sorry." I said I didn't forgive him and that wasn't the point. She kicked at a crack in the sidewalk. "I didn't know about the voice message," she repeated, more for herself than me. "But I knew about other things. Rumors. I let them stick to my hands." She looked at me. "If I blocked, would I have any friends?" "It's messy," I said. "It's work. It's worth it if the noise is making you into someone you don't like." She nodded. "Do you think someday you might unblock me?" It wasn't a supplication. It was a question from someone mapping possible futures. "Maybe," I said, "if we make new rules, if we make new history." "Okay," she said, and we stood there in the sun while a cloud tried and failed to do anything about the heat. In the end, I didn't unblock her that day. Boundaries aren't revenge, I reminded myself, but they also aren't a favor you do for someone else. They're a promise you make to yourself. I wrote her name on a paper in my notebook under the title, Maybe, which is a good place to put things you don't want to forget, but aren't yet strong enough to hold. At the next literature club, I put up my series, What We Refuse to Replace, on the long white wall that had seen more posters than I had breaths. People came, looking both at the pictures and at one another, because that's what we are, mirrors and windows, longing and proof. In one photo, Baba's hands, stained with the gray of graphs and machines, cupped the 1990s manual like it was a heart he was afraid to drop. In another, Gran's bangles lay next to the indigo box with the Aurora line, the old phone asleep inside. The labels were simple. Electrician's screwdriver. Mother's measuring cup. Owner's first phone, retired. Rafi stood beside me, and for once he didn't say anything, which felt like respect. "Do you ever miss the noise?" he asked finally. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "because attention feels like proof. And then I remember I can give myself proof. How?" he asked, genuinely confused. I took a selfie of us with the Lumen 1, the camera catching the low light so it looked like dusk in the afternoon. The Aurora line winked. I did not post it anywhere. I printed it on the kiosk's little photo printer the next day and taped it inside my locker, which smelled faintly of detergent and paper. Proof. On my birthday, I unlocked the drawer and played one of my mother's messages for myself and Gran at breakfast. We laughed at the mango line. We ate mangoes because the season had turned and they were perfect, Gold through and through, so sweet they made our mouths water hard enough to hurt. I lifted the limited edition phone and took a picture of Gran biting into a slice, juice running down her wrist. Her eyes closed in a prayer that had no words. Some part of me had wanted the new phone so people would stop telling me who I was by what I carried. In the end, what it gave me was the power to choose who could approach the place inside me where my stories lived. The silence wasn't the whole life. It was the room where I practiced living. On the last night of the festival, after the cleanup and the leftover samosas and the melancholy that comes at the end of a thing when you realize you'll miss the people who were annoying exactly 7 hours ago, I stood alone in the courtyard. The sky was a lid with holes punched in it. The power grid hummed to make up for its earlier absence. I flipped the block mode switch down, and my phone lit with a handful of patient messages from my circle. I answered each. I flipped it up again, not to keep the world out, but to keep myself in. They had laughed at my old phone. I had upgraded to the limited edition. I had blocked them all, and from the quiet, I made a life that sounded like me. The end.